The team's call started at 9:12 on a Tuesday morning in February, and I remember thinking it was weird that my boss's son had scheduled it for only 15 minutes. I'd been at Harwick Industrial for 26 years. I started as a junior mechanical engineer straight out of the University of Waterloo, back when the company was still run by a man named Harwick himself, a stubborn, sharp-minded guy from Thunder Bay who believed that if you built something worth building, you protected it. He retired in 2019. His son took over shortly after, and by the winter of 2024, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Hamilton, Ontario, watching a loading circle spin on my laptop screen, waiting for a meeting that would end my career there in less than 8 minutes. My son-in-law joined first. That was the first thing that felt wrong. He worked in operations, sure, but he had no business being in a performance review for someone 3 levels above him. Then my boss's son appeared. Then HR. 3 boxes on a screen, and none of them would look directly into the camera. "We've been evaluating the structure of the engineering division," my boss's son said. He had the same flat delivery every time he had to say something he didn't want to say. "And we've made the decision to eliminate your position effective immediately." I didn't say anything for a moment. 26 years. I thought about the drive-through coffee I'd picked up that morning. How I'd been thinking about a problem with the new compression valve design while I waited in the Tim Hortons line. I thought about how I'd had a meeting scheduled for Thursday to walk the junior team through a design revision I'd been working on for 3 months. "Effective immediately," I repeated. "Yes, your benefits will continue for 60 days, and we'll be sending separation documents this afternoon." My son-in-law unmuted himself long enough to say, "We appreciate everything you've contributed." He sounded like he was reading from something. I closed the laptop. I didn't say goodbye. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, looking at the coffee cup, and then I called my wife. I need to back up, because the part that matters happened a long time before that team's call. In 1999, I was 29 years old and had been at Harwick for about 18 months. The company made industrial sealing systems, unglamorous work, the kind of engineering that doesn't end up in magazines, but the kind that keeps pipelines from leaking and refineries from going sideways. I was good at it. I had a feel for pressure dynamics that my colleagues took a while to develop, and I spent a lot of evenings at home running calculations on my own time, on my own computer, because I was genuinely interested in the problem. That winter, I developed a design concept for a dynamic sealing mechanism that could compensate for thermal expansion in high-pressure environments without requiring manual recalibration. The existing solutions required technicians to physically adjust the seal tolerances every time temperatures shifted past a certain threshold. Mine didn't. It self-corrected. My father had been a machinist his whole life. He worked in a tool and die shop in Brantford until his knees gave out, and he understood exactly what it meant when management saw something valuable and decided it belonged to them. When I called him and described what I'd designed, the first thing he said was, "Have you filed for it yet?" I hadn't even thought about it. "File for it," he said. "File for it before you show it to anyone, especially before you show it to them." He died in 2003. I never got to tell him how right he was. I filed the provisional patent application in January of 2000, using my home address on my own time, documented on my personal computer. The design was mine. I had the timestamps, the version history, the CAD files dated weeks before I ever mentioned the concept at work. When I finally presented it to the engineering team in March, the provisional was already on file. When I was asked to develop it further as part of my role at Harwick, which I did, happily, because I believed in the company. There was a clause in my employment agreement that I had negotiated specifically around this. Any intellectual property developed on personal time with personal equipment prior to employment engagement was explicitly excluded from the company's IP ownership provisions. I hadn't negotiated that clause because I was adversarial. I'd done it because my father told me to, and because a lawyer friend had helped me understand what it meant. At the time, Harwick himself had barely blinked at it. He was more interested in what the design could do than who owned it. What the design could do, as it turned out, was become the foundational mechanism in a sealing system that Harwick Industrial licensed to oil and gas operators across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and eventually into the United States Gulf Coast market. By 2015, the licensing revenue from that technology was generating somewhere between $40 and $60 million annually. By 2023, the cumulative value of the patent portfolio built around my original design was assessed, in a third-party valuation my lawyer eventually obtained, at just over $680 million. I held the root patent, and it had never transferred. I didn't know I was going to need it until the Tuesday in February when they let me go. For the first few days, I was just angry. Not the hot kind of angry. The cold, quiet kind that settles in your chest and doesn't move. I'd given that company the best years of my engineering career. I'd mentored probably 30 junior engineers over 2.5 decades. I'd stayed late during the Fort McMurray supply crisis of 2016 when the entire northern operations team was scrambling. I'd taken the calls on Christmas Eve when a seal failure threatened a northeastern BC pipeline installation, and my boss's son had scheduled 15 minutes and couldn't even look at the camera. My wife was practical about it in the way she always was. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table 3 days after the call, and she put a mug of tea in front of me and said, "What does your lawyer say?" I hadn't called my lawyer yet. I'd been too busy being angry. I called him that afternoon. His name was a name I'd known for 22 years, a quiet, meticulous man in Oakville who had helped me with the original patent filing and had kept copies of everything as a matter of professional habit. When I described the situation, he was quiet for a moment. "And the licensing agreement they've been operating under," he said slowly, "was that ever formally assigned to Harwick Industrial?" I thought about it. There was an arrangement, early 2000s. But I don't think it was a full assignment. It was a licensing structure. "Do you have the documents? You probably have better copies than I do." He did. What my lawyer found, when he went through everything, was this. The original arrangement between me and Harwick Industrial had been structured as an exclusive licensing agreement, not a patent assignment. At the time, it hadn't mattered much. Harwick himself was running the company. We had a handshake understanding layered over the legal structure, and I'd trusted him. The licensing agreement had a renewal clause, and it had been renewed automatically every 5 years. But buried in the original agreement, specifically in Section 14.2, a paragraph I hadn't looked at in over a decade, was language that tied the continuation of the license to my ongoing employment with the company. My ongoing employment, which had ended at 9/12 on a Tuesday morning in February. My lawyer explained it to me over the phone in that same quiet, careful way he had. I sat very still. Outside it was snowing, the kind of heavy, wet February snow that sticks to everything and makes the whole world look muffled. "So what does that mean?" I said. "It means the license lapsed the moment they terminated your employment. Harwick Industrial has been operating as though they owned that technology. They don't, and they haven't, technically, since the morning of February 11th. I put the phone down on the table and stared at the wall for a long time. The technology was embedded in roughly 60% of their active product line. It was the mechanism at the center of their highest margin licensing contracts with 3 major Alberta operators. It was the foundation of 2 subsidiary products they'd developed in the last decade. Without a valid license, they couldn't legally manufacture, sell, or supplicence any of it. 60% of Harwick Industrial's revenue, gone, the moment they fired me. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I've thought about it a lot, and I'm not sure I handled it perfectly. My first instinct was to do nothing. Just let it sit. Part of me thought, they'll figure it out. Someone in their legal department will run the numbers and realize what happened, and they'll call and ask me to come back, and I'll decide then whether I want to. But my lawyer was more realistic. They won't find it themselves, he said. Not unless someone specifically reviews the original agreement. Most of their internal legal team won't know that document exists. This will surface when one of their operators asks for updated certification on a licensed product, or when they go to renew one of the downstream contracts. That could be months from now. Meanwhile, you're sitting on an expired license situation with no formal notice sent. What do you recommend? I recommend we send formal notice. We drafted a letter. It was 2 pages, very precise, referencing Section 14.2, the termination date, the lapsed license, and the legal status of all products and sublicenses derived from the technology. My lawyer sent it to Harwick Industrial's legal department on a Thursday afternoon in March, about 6 weeks after I'd been let go. I heard nothing for 11 days. Then my son-in-law called me. Not my boss's son, not the CEO, my son-in-law who had sat in that Teams call and said he appreciated my contributions and was now calling me from what sounded like a parking garage, his voice low and slightly strained. "I'm not calling officially," he said. "Okay, there's a lot happening right now, internally, and I thought someone should call you." "What's happening?" He paused. "They brought in outside counsel. There's a meeting tomorrow with the board. It's not good." I didn't say anything. "Is there any way this can be resolved?" he asked. Is there a version of this where I'm going to stop you there?" I said. "If Harwick Industrial wants to discuss this, they can contact my lawyer. That's how this works now." He was quiet for a moment. "Right," he said. "Okay, yeah." I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a while. My wife came in and asked who it was. I told her. She nodded slowly and poured herself a coffee and didn't say anything else, which was exactly right. The formal negotiation took 4 months. Harwick Industrial's outside counsel made 3 separate attempts to argue that the Section 14.2 clause was unenforceable, that my termination constituted a constructive restructuring rather than a true termination, and that the original license had been informally superseded by 2 decades of operating practice. My lawyer, who had been quietly gathering documentation since February, dismantled each of those arguments with the patience of someone who had been waiting 24 years to have this specific conversation. My boss's son requested a call with me directly in May. I agreed on the condition that both our lawyers were present. It was a video call again. This time he looked directly at the camera. He started with an apology. It was the kind of apology that was really a negotiating position. He was sorry about how things were communicated, sorry about the timing, the manner, the lack of notice. He said he hoped I understood that the decision structural rather than personal. "I appreciate that," I said. "My lawyer has our response to the last counter-proposal. Would you like to go through it now?" He did not look like he wanted to go through it now, but he nodded. The settlement we eventually reached was structured as a new licensing agreement, a genuine one this time, with proper documentation, proper terms, and a licensing fee that reflected what that technology was actually worth. Over a 15-year term, the numbers were significant. I'm not going to state them exactly, because that's not my style, and it's not the point of this. The point is that on a Friday afternoon in late September, almost 8 months after that February Teams call, I signed documents that my lawyer had prepared at his Oakville office. Outside the window, the leaves were turning, that particular Ontario autumn orange that always makes the province look like it's trying to be beautiful before winter arrives. My wife picked me up afterward. We went for dinner at a place we liked on the waterfront. We didn't talk about the settlement much. We talked about our daughter, who was finishing her first year of a nursing program in Ottawa. We talked about maybe driving out to see her in October. Here's what I've thought about in the months since. I didn't win because I was smarter than they were. I won because my father, a machinist who never went to university, told me to protect what I built before I showed it to anyone. I won because a lawyer friend spent a Saturday afternoon in 1999 explaining IP language to me over coffee. I won because the documentation was clean and honest and dated correctly, and because I'd held on to all of it without ever expecting to need it. I also think about the people in that company, the junior engineers I mentored, the operations staff who had nothing to do with the decision to let me go. My son-in-law included, honestly, even if his call from the parking garage still makes me shake my head a little. Most of them were just doing their jobs. The situation they got caught in wasn't one they chose. But here's what I'd say to anyone who's sitting where I was sitting in February, at a kitchen table, cold coffee, laptop closed, 26 years suddenly in the past tense. File the paperwork, keep the documentation, store it somewhere safe, and store a copy somewhere safer. When you build something on your own time, with your own hands, on your own equipment, Protect it the way my father told me to. Not because you're suspicious of the people around you. Because the world changes, management changes, and the only thing that stays constant is the date on a patent application. My father didn't live to see how it turned out, but I think about him every time I sit at that kitchen table, and I think he would have understood. He built things his whole life. He just always made sure he knew who they belonged to.